This is Agriculture Today, and I'm Shelby Varner with the K-State Radio Network. Drew Ricketts and Joe Gerken from K-State kick off today's show with part of a Fins, Fur, and Feathers podcast episode where they discuss flooding. They explain the causes, the issues it can create, and what can be a positive. Keeping the show rolling is Logan Simon and Renee Tuttle as the pair preview the upcoming Garden City Field Day Plus, what topics they'll be talking about, and what else attendees can learn. K-State dairy specialist Mike Brouk ends today's show talking about how to determine a fair price for corn silage for both buyer and seller. That and more is coming up ahead. You're tuned in to Agriculture Today, and we start our show with part of a Fins, Fur, and Feathers podcast episode from K-State's Drew Ricketts and Joe Gerken.
Welcome back to another episode of Fins, Fur, and Feathers. We've got an aquatics episode this week, so what do you got teed up for us, Joe?
Yeah, I wanted to talk about flooding today, and so it's kind of a topical issue. Lots of discussions about flooding in the news, and they're happening all over the place. We went from getting a lot of calls about drought, which we've been into, and now people are starting to experience the opposite of that. We're getting too much water. So thought we'd talk about what a flood is and some of the benefits and maybe detriments of having a flood.
Yeah, that's good. Definitely a very timely topic. So are there important factors that we need to think about? What makes a flood and what's the stuff that really matters about a flood?
Yeah, a flood's just too much water. I think most people know that. And when water gets into areas that we don't want it to be, that would be flooding. And there are four main parameters that kind of drive that. First one is timing. So when is it happening? When the temperature starts to rise and we get warmer weather that starts to melt some of the snow, we see that washing off of the mountains, and that can cause flooding in some of the streams below it. That's a really common example. Or is it, a summer flood that's related to rainfall or something like that? So timing's important. Duration, how long is this flood lasting? So is it, rising up really high and coming back down? Still can be detrimental from a human standpoint. If water gets inside of your house and floods your whole house, whether it's there for a minute or it's there for days. Obviously, there are some differences, but
sure.
From an ecological standpoint too, lots of importance in how long that flood lasts. Magnitude is often measured in discharge, so cubic feet per second, how much water is moving through an area. And that's going to depend on how wide our stream or river is too, right? And so the magnitude would just kind of be relative to normal flow, how much flow is there. And the last one's intensity. So we generally look at intensity as a recurrence interval. And so we talk about, you might hear a 5-year flood or a 50-year flood or a 100-year flood. And really what that means is how many years on average would it take for this flood to occur? So a 100-year flood would occur once every 100 years. A 5-year flood would occur once every 5 years. And so obviously a 100-year flood less likely would have more of an extreme magnitude. We'd see more flooding or more water with that situation.
Some of these floods that we've seen this year that have caused some catastrophic damage and loss of life and those sorts of things, what kind of floods were those?
Yeah, so those are flash floods that we're seeing, and that's primarily driven by rainfall. The experts think that a lot of that's because of the warmer waters that we're experiencing in the Gulf and some of the Atlantic. And so that's loading up the atmosphere with more water, and it's colliding with some cooler air and dumping large amounts of rain. And so a flash flood would just be a flood that, it shows up. We're not really expecting it. Water levels rise really, really quickly. More traditional flooding would be something, a river slowly overflows its banks. Some of that is naturally occurring. Rivers used to be dynamic and exchange with wetland habitats on either side of them. We've done a good job of damming them up and putting levees on the side of them and trying to control where that water goes. But, it doesn't always stay where we want it to stay.
Some of the characteristics potentially of the landscape that can make flooding more likely or make it worse. What are some more things that we need to think about there?
Yeah, so understanding the surface that we have is a really big important thing. And so one of the things I think is overlooked is how many impervious surfaces we have in these areas, right? And so something like concrete, the water can't soak through that. So it's going to flow over the surface, go into a sewer system, and then wash into a river or a stream. That process happens a lot more quickly than if that same amount of water falls in a dirt field where it can be soaked up and then slowly make its way to that stream or river. And so the amount of impervious surfaces that we have, the urban areas that we have, really can lead to some of this catastrophic flooding. What plant community that we have near a river can be really important. And so a lot of times we're cutting down a lot of the native vegetation or going in and filling in some of these areas with, either non-native vegetation. Crops would be, common that we see, people cropping right up to the edge of these rivers. And that, on a sediment level, that makes that sediment a lot more likely to erode and can start causing problems where you can see more flooding. So things like that would definitely lead to differences in flooding.
How would you sort of combat some of that erosion and maybe reduce the amount of sediment that's going into streams? I know that can be a problem.
Yeah, a lot of that, we can do that on really small scales by just letting some vegetation grow up. And small amounts of vegetation, if we let it grow up, can grow large root systems, right? And so I think establishing some of the native plants along the edge and along these riparian areas. Riparian area would just be areas adjacent to the riverway is a good way to kind of slow that down and hold some of that sediment back.
We probably all think about the negative consequences of floods for us, property damage and potentially loss of life and those sorts of things. But what maybe negative things and also what positive things can floods have in terms of implications for terrestrial and aquatic ecosystems?
Yeah. So, I don't want to downplay the importance of the human side of things, because there are reasons that we want to control flooding. But, floods are a tremendously valuable, beneficial experience for Mother Nature if we take out some of those human negative side effects. If flooding in an area we don't want it, like you mentioned, can kill a bunch of trees. That's unfortunate. But that's also part of, over time, Mother Nature might reclaim another area, and an area that had been aquatic might, regrow some new trees. And that process is important too, right? And so having that transition over time, what is that called?
Ecological disturbance. So, it'd be serving the same role as prescribed fire and snow and ice and those sorts of things. Scouring from floods is definitely an ecological disturbance. And
then you see secession after that, right?
Yeah,
and so that's what I was thinking about, where, you kind of see it go from an early flooded and it might turn into terrestrial habitat over time. And so seeing that, I think, is really fun. But when you have flooding, you get something called lateral connectivity, and lateral, means to the side. And so we're connecting a flowing waterway to the sides to area that's normally terrestrial. And that can provide a lot of benefits. It can provide benefits to, some of the best farm ground in the world is right next to a river. And that's because, a lot of those nutrients from the river are pushed out into those areas, those wetland areas, where all those nutrients then become available for growth. A lot of times, historically, there have been a lot of wetlands, especially further south, where those adjacent areas are really important, and they're just nutrient-rich areas. And so that's important for deposition of nutrients. So get it out of the waterways and have a place for it to go where it can be utilized. The actual physical structure of the river itself is regulated by that lateral connectivity. And so really important there. Plant community, you get dispersal of a lot of different seeds that happen in flooding. You can see it wash away some plants that might become established, and it might, get rid of some of those terrestrial plants that need reset every few years, that disturbance like you're talking about, and replace them with something that likes water, right? Likes to have wet feet. And so from the plant community side, you start to see that. And then a lot of animals depend on it too. And so you can see spikes in the number of fish that are recruiting or reproducing in a certain year because they get access to these habitats. And some of those fish are, common fish that we might not care about, or most people might not, like a river carp sucker or freshwater drum. But there are also a lot of our fish that we're going out and trying to catch that utilize those habitats. There are some really big, cool fish. Alligator gar, which can be a couple 100 pounds. They can swim into these really shallow areas. When I was in Arkansas, we used to go out into fields that were flooding, and you'd see half of a gar sticking out, slithering through this muddy, flooded area and leaving behind millions of eggs, and they adhere to all the see them on soybeans or corn or whatever was flooded there, or the native habitat. So it's incredible how these animals are taking advantage of this connectivity.
Is there anything that if my pond was flooded, beyond just keeping an eye on it, should I actively do anything or just monitor?
I think getting any type of debris that you see out of it quickly is relatively important. Obviously there's going to be physical constraints to that, but the quicker you can get that stuff out, the better. I really think keeping an eye on it, figuring out if there are fish there that you don't want, getting rid of those. If there are unwanted issues, sometimes I'll see areas that, you have a little bit of damage to your dam structure, for example. Getting on top of that quickly, like within a day or two, is immensely important. It probably can be fixed if you get to it quickly, but if you wait even a few days and let that water keep eating at it, it can quickly get to a point you can't do anything about it. So that's something that would be what I would be on the lookout for the most. And when you have those high flow events, getting all that much water in your pond can definitely cause those catastrophic issues.
Once again, that was Kansas State University's Joe Gerken and Drew Ricketts with part of their Fins, Fur, and Feathers podcast episode. If you'd like to hear the full episode, you can do so by following the link in today's show notes on agtoday.net, searching for Fins, Fur, and Feathers on your favorite podcast platform, or you can also navigate to it by going to the wildlife website, which is wildlife.k-state.edu. We're cutting to a short break now on Agriculture Today, but when we come back, we'll be joined by K-State's Logan Simon and Renee Tuttle. You're tuned in to Agriculture Today, and we continue our show discussing the Garden City Fall Field Day Plus with K-State Extension agronomist Logan Simon and K-State Extension associate Renee Tuttle. Logan, Renee, thank you both so much for taking the time to join us today.
Thank you.
Thanks for having us on.
Logan, this Garden City Fall Field Day Plus, what does the plus mean?
Yeah, so we always get that question. Several years ago, the Garden City group made the decision to kind of expand what we offer for our fall field day, including some more sessions that happen inside after our program outside, where we're going to the plots, we're talking about the field results, but also including a couple more presentations inside of different programs. Specifically, in the afternoon, we have been including additional programs, including from our family and consumer science specialist out of Garden City, Rachel Clues, talking on especially mental health as it relates to agriculture and that aspect of things that we know our farmers and farm families are also working through. With that added on to the broader field day, we've really got a very full day of programs, and so have taken on that term Field Day Plus.
And this day taking place on Thursday, August 21st, starting at 8 a.m. And what are the first programs that are taking place?
Yeah, so we will have two different groups that will go across the station. We're very fortunate to have buses donated from Garden City Community College to transport folks across the station. Our programs include a discussion on weed management for corn and grain sorghum from our weed scientist, Pat Geyer, here at the Garden City Station, as well as some discussions from cropping systems agronomist John Holman talking about the long-term reduced and no-till wheat sorghum fallow experiment at Garden City, as well as taking a look at that warm season hay and silage trial that we've had going on here at Garden City for quite a few years. That always does get people engaged. I myself am going to be presenting some results from last year's work on cotton growth and development here for Southwest Kansas, that as an alternative crop in our environment for water conservation. Another highlight of this event will be some discussion on on TAPS.
And Renee, TAPS, your program that you're leading, and what will you be chatting about?
We will be talking about sustainable irrigations and some tactics that we're putting together through our farm management competitions to help forward the progress with our state water management plans. This is our first year in Garden City with the TAPS competition, and so we're excited to share data from it, get out in the field, take a look at all the different hybrids we have planted with the different irrigation rates, and also hear from local technology companies that have assisted us in performing this farm management competition this year, some irrigation folks and some different soil sensors and technologies that we have out in the field. So we're happy to bring a full industry and local extension and research approach to the field day this year.
What crops were you growing in Garden City for TAPS?
This year with TAPS in Garden City, we focused on water utilization with corn. And so all of our participants are working under a Q-stable amount of 10.95 inches. And so we're looking at the variance in hybrid selection, nitrogen, and irrigation as we stay under that Q-stable amount.
As these teams are competing, can you see differences out in the field for the different corn as they've made their own decisions?
Absolutely. So as the corn was growing, you could see a few height differences. It's really interesting to keep tabs on that. But as we got further in our growth stages, especially around tasseling, we began tasseling about a week ago. There were some that obviously, have different maturity dates, and so started tasseling before others. And it's just, a stark difference. We've been able to get some amazing drone imagery that shows, differences in colors and heights and all sorts of things. And so we actually had a field day out this past week with a smaller group, and farmers were able to get out and look, and they're just amazed to see so many hybrids in place.
And Logan, coming back to your topic, we'll be talking about cotton. What are some things, if you don't mind sharing, that you saw from your past work?
In the data that I'll be presenting on cotton management, this is based on a study that we've had going out here at the Garden City Station since 2019, looking at really all aspects of basic cotton management for Southwest Kansas. So looking at, basic things related to planting dates, variety selection, seeding rate, and obviously irrigation with a couple different limited irrigation rates as that really is the scenario where cotton fits well into Southwest Kansas. Last year was a really interesting year because, again, we are looking at cotton under limited irrigation. Because of that, with last year's precipitation amounts, funny enough, we didn't see a whole lot of interesting differences there. But when you dive into some of those basic things like variety selection, planting date, and seeding rate, we saw some interesting dynamics, and look forward to discussing that more, as cotton in Kansas is so similar to other portions of the belt and yet also quite unique. So we'll be diving more into that at this field day.
And after attendees rotate and get to hear all those 5 different topics, after lunch, they get to come back inside and hear from Anthony Zukoff. And what's he chatting about?
Anthony Zukoff, our extension entomologist here at Garden City, is going to be talking on the topic of the day since last year, which is the corn leafhopper. And he will be providing an update on the monitoring that they have been doing this year across Kansas. He works very closely with Rodrigo Onofre, our state row crops extension plant pathologist. And so kind of giving an update on what all we've seen in terms of leafhopper activity in Kansas, what's been similar to last year, what's been different, and how we've been kind of modifying some of our approaches. And as we learn more about this still very new pest for Kansas.
And following that, taking a step away from agronomy, a topic called cultivating resiliency.
Our participants are going to hear from Rachel Clues, our Extension Family and Consumer Science Specialist for Southwest Kansas, who has a focus on mental health. Rachel is going to be presenting on a topic she called Cultivating Resiliency for our farmers and farm families. And Rachel's been presenting at this field day for the last couple of years and really provides a perspective on managing, being mindful of mental health as we in agriculture endure the ups and downs from a production standpoint, economic standpoint, public policy standpoint, and really always has a good message to provide for folks as we really are increasingly aware of the mental health challenges we face in agriculture.
Renee, what rounds out the field day?
We're excited to be working with our local groundwater management districts, not only for this field day and our new exciting producer panel, but every day. And so as we are furthering the mission of recharging the aquifer, we're excited to bring in a producer panel to discuss what's worked for them, what hasn't worked for them, maybe some alternative crops, some alternative irrigation practices. And so we're bringing in 4 local producers, the first being Matt Long from Leota. He is a producer that has been part of the TAPS program for both years that we have had the competition, and really focuses on sharing the good word on social media and also in practice on his farm for sustainable irrigation. We will also have Tom Leahy from Moscow, and he will discuss cotton and alternative cropping systems there. Walt Beasley from Hugoton, and he will focus on affluent water and those practices. Rounding out the producer panel with John Handy from Kismet, and he will discuss forages and how he's utilized those on his farming operation. So we're excited to bring in an interactive panel. If you've met these folks, you know that they are very vocal and willing to share to help lead the charge and continue to grow the mission of recharging the aquifer.
Who do you recommend take the time to attend this field day?
Anyone and everyone in Southwest Kansas. You do not have to be actively involved in production agriculture to get a benefit from attending the Fall Field Day Plus at Garden City. But if you are, especially, we encourage you to take the opportunity to join us for this very educational Fall Field Day, touching on so many aspects of agronomy and crop production from all angles, many crops, and is just really an excellent, and we believe an excellent program for everyone.
Can you remind us about when and where this is taking place?
Yeah, so the Fall Field Day is going to be on August 21st here at the Southwest Research Extension Center in Garden City at 4500 East Mary Street in Garden City.
If people would like to get registered or find some more information on the Garden City Fall Field Day Plus, how can they do that?
So there are several links to the registration for the Fall Field Day. I believe that has gone out in the Agronomy e-update newsletter, so folks can look to the e-newsletter for that article on field days in Western Kansas. Additionally, if they go to the Western Kansas Research Extension Center, WKREC, website on our events page, you'll see links to register for the Garden City Field Day, as well as our additional field days happening in August at Hayes and Tribune.
Is there any cost?
No, there is absolutely no cost to attend these field days.
Logan, Renee, I appreciate you both taking the time to join us today.
Thanks, Shelby.
That was K-State Extension Agronomist Logan Simon and K-State Extension Associate Renee Tuttle. I will put the links that they mentioned in today's show notes on agtoday.net. We're cutting to a short break now, but we'll be right back.
This is Agriculture Today. Along with Shelby Varner, I'm Jeff Wickman. We end today's program with this week's milk lines. The harvesting of corn silage will begin soon, and K-State dairy specialist Mike Brouk looks at some ways to determine a fair price for the corn silage.
Today I'd like to visit with our Kansas dairy producers concerning the pricing of corn silage as we approach silage harvest. I know many of you probably will be buying a few acres of corn, standing corn, from your neighbor for chopping for silage to feed your dairy herd in the next year. And it seems like this time of year we always get all kinds of questions about how do I price it, what's fair for both myself as well as the person that I'm buying from. As we think about the actual price of corn grain in our markets today, it does vary across the state by about probably 50, maybe almost 60 cents a bushel, depending on where you're at. So the value of corn in your local area may be different than it is for your friend that's a few hours away in a different part of the state. So keep in mind that all of these prices are going to be impacted by the local grain market that you might have in your location. Second thing I want you to think about is the grain yield that's actually out there in that field. You see, a lot of times we're looking at grain yield that might be high or low depending on how much rainfall we've had over the summer, whether or not it's dry land or whether it's irrigated acres. And obviously the grain yield on dry land can be much more variable than under irrigation. So when we look at pricing that corn standing out in the field, we usually are going to buy it by the ton. And the bushel yield will impact the tonnage as it's an indication of just how well the corn grew over the growing season. So if we're expecting a low yield, let's say 70 bushel to the acre, how would we price that compared to if we were looking at a high yield, say maybe 200 bushels per the acre? Well, one of the things that we've used over the years is just simply a pricing factor that's so much times the bushel price of corn. So if we're looking at a low yield, maybe a place to start is 8 times whatever the local price per bushel might be. If we're looking at a high yield situation where we might be pushing 200 bushel to the acres, then we might want to look at 10 times the bushel price of the corn. Now, a couple of things to consider as you think about that is when we use these sort of factors, we're assuming that corn silage is going to be about 35% dry matter. Well, what if it's only 30% dry matter? What is the fair price then? Well, you don't want to buy a lot of extra water and pay corn price for it, right? So you might want to convert that to a dry matter price. So if you price that in based on 35% dry matter and you're actually going to be harvesting it and it's only going to be 30% dry matter, you should adjust that value. That'll probably save you about $4 per ton on the ton price. Should end up yielding about the same value for the total acre of corn for your neighbor, but it will come to you at a little less cost per ton. If you do not correct for that, then you're going to be paying, say, $4 a ton more than maybe what you should have based on the calculation that we just used. Some other things to maybe help you and your neighbor in the discussion is the fact that when you buy standing corn, you're going to be paying the harvest cost, and you're only paying for what's removed from the field. Your neighbor may be concerned about, well, what about the fertilizer that we're taking off, organic matter, those sorts of things. Yes, there is a value for that. Based on current fertilizer prices and removal rates, that might be $4.50, $5 a ton of fertilizer that's being removed with each ton of corn silage coming off the field. So there is different ways and different factors that you can use. I can generally find as I visit with producers that many people still use so much times the price of corn as the starting place, and then very commonly we make an adjustment for the moisture content of the material actually removed. This is Mike Brouk with K-State Research and Extension, encouraging our dairy farmers to consider the neighbor's side of things as they look at pricing corn silage as well as their dairy in making an accurate estimate of what that price should be.
Thanks, Mike. And that'll do it for this edition of Agriculture Today. For Shelby Varner, I'm Jeff Wickman. This is the K-State Radio Network.